Hi guys, and welcome back to another Borkino game video. Today's video is dedicated to Gran Colo and lessons learned, ways to improve your guild. But before we go into that, just note that we got free 300 Twilight Crystals today. So go ahead and claim your free 300 Twilight Crystals. Congratulations to SINoALICE for essentially reaching, over 7 million downloads globally. That is absolutely amazing. Or I believe this is just 7 million players in general, right? So let's get right into the actual video. So the first thing you're gonna do, go into gear, and I want us to talk about the Colo set that I have in particular, right? So if I go here into my Colo set, this is the way I have myself geared, and you'll notice that I have more physical attack, I have more like swords and hammers, etc, etc. Now the biggest thing that I want to cover is when you're building your grid, you want it in a way where you are synergizing with your guild. So I went into the weapon section for SINoALICE, and essentially my goal was to, pick weapons that have high physical attack at base. Doesn't matter how many total stats they have, my goal was to pick up as many weapons as I possibly can that have high physical attack. So for example, the Sword of Bondage that's available in the Charm Metal shop has quite a bit of physical attack on it, so I picked this one up in particular. And the reason that I'm covering essentially physical attack is, let's go into here. The biggest thing I want us to take note of is that we have our vanguard up here, right? And what we want to focus on is that our vanguards will have physical attack, right? And our supports will be essentially giving physical attack buffs to me or to anyone who's a physical attacker, right? So everyone who's a physical attacker will get physical buffs. And then someone like Lloyd right here, he is a magical attacker, he will get a different set of buffs. And what I'm trying to tell you here is that essentially you want to make it your guild in a way where essentially people are getting focused for particular buffs and other people will get different buffs. And then as far as like Sorks go, let's change that into a different color. As far as like Sorks go, Sorks will provide magical defense down on certain people, and magical DPS will focus these people in particular because they have magical defense down. And then people who are focusing on physical defense down, like for example Sam and myself, we would be attacking Hime, right? So that's like the idea that I want to point out, is that essentially that as a guild as a whole, you synergize with what is going to be available to you so that your grid is optimized for your grid, or for your guild in particular. So my grid on the right hand side is optimized so that my physical attack will be better and can deal more physical attack. I'm not building physical attack in the sense of I'm going to be better than like everyone for damage. I'm doing it so that my guild as a whole, we will have certain tactics so that my physical attack damage will be better off because I have my supports who are helping me out. And of course, clerics fall in the line of keeping everyone alive, which is entirely separate, right? So ideally, as your vanguard, you are essentially working with your supports so that you can properly build your grid along with them. That's an important part. Next thing I wanted to cover is nightmares, and right now we're doing a thing where we're rearranging our nightmares and making it so that our nightmares work with everyone in the guild. For example, I L'd Freeze Golem because this is a nightmare that will greatly benefit us, since right now in the meta most weapons are water elements. And the reason why that's so important to note is that when Freeze Golem drops, he is an absolute threat in Colo, because what happens is someone makes a shot call, Freeze Golem going up, everyone saves their water elemental weapons, or you're gonna prepare to reload your deck so you can get more water weapons. And what happens is as soon as Freeze Golem drops, everyone just pops. I think you've seen this before where people will summon like Lindworm or what have you, and essentially as soon as that like nightmare is pretty much popped, it is disastrous to the other opponent team because they essentially just get like axed, right? And it's not because they're weaker, they don't have enough debuffs or buff, it's just because effectiveness for skills, they deal so much damage and provide such a huge modifier. So when you're building a nightmare grid for your make sure that you're working with your guildmates and understanding, hey, does someone have, you know, El Freeze Golem, or does someone have El Shadow Lord, who has El Lindworm, etc, etc. I'm not going to be providing nightmare orders because nightmare order is, the more I look into it, the more I'm like, there isn't a perfect nightmare order. There is a suggested nightmare order, but nightmare order essentially depends on the way you want to, you know, handle your guild. So next thing, let's cover armor. So the reason why I want to talk about armor really quick is because armor is essentially a stat stick in PvP. If you want to really like optimize your armor, then essentially you would just run the highest stat armor that you have, because there are no effects in Colosseum that take place, like i.e. like a set effect doesn't apply in Colosseum, right? This cannot apply in Colosseum, and this cannot apply in Colosseum. It's a story support. And the reason why is because, you know, set effects are for a particular type of enemy. There is no, technically, you cannot fight, you know, Kaine, like, herself. Usually when you fight, like, versions of characters, they are in some sort of nightmare form. So in Colosseum, you know, set effects don't really matter. The only thing matters in Colosseum is how high are your stats in particular. And ideally, you know, your physical defense and magical defense for clerics and supports, clerics in particular are relatively high. So ideally pick up weapons with fairly high physical defense or magical defense. And the reason why you're optimizing your grid, particularly weapons, armor, and nightmare, is because essentially you want it so that you work with your guildies so that we know what you are good at. Because note that in Colosseum, you perform better when you work with your guildies. If you're an individual trying to outperform others, it's not going to work, in the sense of, if you have a bunch of supports who are mostly buffing you in magical attack, and you're a physical attack, you know, DPS, that serves you like no purpose, you know? Ideally, you get to plus 20 physical attack and buffs before you get to plus 20 in magical attack. And ideally, you know, the Sorks on the enemy, on your team, are debuffing, you know, physical defense, right? Because you want it so that you are more tactically like approaching Colosseum as you get into the higher leagues. You don't want it so that everyone is just running a hodgepodge grid set where everyone's just running like the highest stats, because running like, you know, or the highest point values, running the highest point values won't net you the proper outcome that you want. When you are focused, you can, you know, essentially deal more damage and you can be much more effective in Colosseum, right? So the next thing that I wanted to cover is, of course, you know, when you're fighting someone of a quality fight, you know, make sure you take that person seriously, but ideally, you know, practice your nightmare orders. That's going to be the biggest thing. Practice making shot calls, etc. For example, Freeze Golem's about to drop everyone save water weapons. You know, drop AoE when you want to burst people down, etc, etc. And the last thing that I wanted to cover was this Google spreadsheet. Shoutouts to KennedyQ and Demiik, the man, the myth, the legend himself over on Twitch. You know, this is a really cool thing that he's created, and note that this is, you know, of course his opinion, and this is the opinion of others, so it's not perfect, right? If you want to be on this, you know, just let him know. He's on like Twitch, and I believe he's going to be starting a YouTube, but just let him know, you know, contact him. I'll have his Discord links down below, talk to him, and I'll also have his Twitch links down below and his Twitter. So, and the biggest thing why this is so important, and of course this is focused around like, you know, America/EU server. The reason why this is so important is because this allows us to interact better as a community. And SINoALICE is a very community guild driven game. And the more that we can look at stuff like this Google spreadsheet, the more we can kind of like understand like what is the future of the game and who we're going to be matching up with. Of course, there can be like upcoming guilds, right? And they're going to be pretty much knocking all of the people at the top, like, or giving people like some issues. But the purpose of this Google sheet is essentially to, you know, understand like who are some people that you need to watch out for. And of course, everyone can change their guild names, what have you, and, you know, create confusion. But the thing is this is just a fun thing to engage the community more in Colosseum. Now, that's pretty much all I have for this video, but let's, you know, cover it all. So the things that you want to do is ideally focus on your grid, right? Focus on your weapon grid in particular first. Make it so that essentially that you synergize with your supports, right? I'm physical attack, supports have physical attack buffs on me, and I work with my Sork so that physical defense down is targeted to a unit or targeted to a person that I want to hit. Like for example, I would like to hit like Cosmic, right? And then for armor, essentially it's just stat stick purposes. Run the armor that has the highest stats. You can break the set effects. It does story skills support effects don't apply. And lastly, nightmares are going to be based off of your guild situation, and I'll do a situational like nightmare video later on, and I'll also do a grid optimization for Coliseum specifically later on, right? And then lastly, you know, thanks to Demiik for providing this Google Sheets. Anyways, thanks for checking me out. Like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter. I'll see you in the next one.